had always been so simple. I knew what my life was, what my role was within it. I was a wife, a mother, a woman content with the rhythms of everyday life. My husband, Alexei, and I had built a home, a family, a routine that we both found comfort in. Our son, Daniel, was growing up too quickly, as sons do, but he still held on to the warmth of his childhood. I could still remember the sound of his laughter when he was young, the way he would cling to my side in public, as if I was his entire world. Felt like it had been that way forever, this balance, this predictability. But then, slowly, so slowly I couldn't pinpoint exactly when it started, things began to shift. It was as though the very air in our home had changed, thickened somehow, without me noticing it until it was too late. It wasn't one big moment, not at first. It was little things. The way Daniel would now sit closer to me at dinner, brushing against my arm as if it were the most natural thing in the world. He had always been a quiet boy, content to eat his meal in silence, lost in his thoughts. But lately, I noticed that his gaze lingered just a little too long, as if there was something unspoken between us. I told myself it was nothing. Adolescence, I thought. He's just going through phases. But even so, I couldn't help but feel a tension whenever he was near. His eyes, dark and intense, seemed to study me in ways they never had before. It was a kind of awareness, a knowing look that I couldn't place. Sometimes I would catch him watching me from the corner of the room, and my heart would beat a little faster for no reason at all. I tried to ignore it, to brush it off as just part of the growing pains of a teenager, but it didn't feel right. In the evenings after dinner, when Alexei and I would sit together on the couch to watch TV, Daniel would often come into the room, asking to join us. I had no reason to deny him. It was nice to have him there, the three of us. But again, I felt something shift when he'd sit so close, his leg brushing against mine. I shifted away, making an excuse about being tired, but I couldn't ignore the strange discomfort growing inside me. And then it happened. One evening, after Alexei had gone to bed early, I was sitting alone in the living room, reading a book. The quiet of the house enveloped me, the usual sense of peace that settled over me in the late hours. I heard Daniel's footsteps approaching, slow and deliberate. He didn't say anything at first, just stood in the doorway for a moment, watching me. There was something in the air, something unspoken that hung between us. "Mom," he said softly, almost hesitantly. "Can I talk to you?" I looked up from my book, startled by the seriousness in his tone. I nodded, setting the book aside and patting the seat next to me on the couch. He hesitated for a moment, then walked over and sat down beside me, too close for my comfort. It was strange, that closeness, and I felt an unease creeping over me, but I didn't say anything. "Not yet. I've been thinking about things," he started, his voice almost a whisper. About the way things are changing. Between us." Froze. My heart thudded in my chest, and I struggled to keep my composure. What was he saying? What was happening? The silence stretched out between us, and I forced myself to look at him, really look at him. He was no longer a boy. He was tall, his features sharper now. His eyes dark with something I didn't understand. "I feel like we're drifting," he said, the words hanging in the air like an accusation. "Like things aren't the same." I swallowed hard, not knowing how to respond. I wanted to brush it off, to tell him that everything was fine, that he was just growing up and that things always felt strange at this age. But his eyes. Those eyes were not the eyes of the little boy I once knew. There was something deeper, something I wasn't ready to acknowledge. "I'm sure it's just a phase," I said finally, my voice sounding weak even to my own ears. "Things will settle down. You're just adjusting." He didn't respond right away. Instead, he shifted on the couch, closer to me still, and I felt the warmth of his body pressing against mine. It was too much. Too much. I forced myself to keep calm, to remain composed. This wasn't right, but I couldn't put it into words. I didn't know how. He looked at me then, his gaze locking with mine. There was something dangerous in his eyes, something that sent a chill down my spine. But still I stayed silent, my mind racing, my body frozen. The moment felt stretched out like I was holding my breath, waiting for something to happen. And then, without another word, he stood up and walked away, leaving me sitting there, my heart pounding in my chest. What had just happened? What had he meant by that? I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted, that this moment had marked a change I wasn't ready for. I didn't know what it was, but I knew it had only just begun. The days after that evening passed in a blur, each one feeling both too fast and too slow. I kept telling myself that it was just a phase. Adolescence. Boys go through strange changes after all. It wasn't as if Daniel had done anything overtly inappropriate. But the quiet, almost imperceptible shift in his behavior was becoming harder to ignore. It wasn't the big things that unsettled me. It was the small, nearly insignificant moments that gnawed at the edges of my peace. The way he lingered in the kitchen when I was cooking, standing just a little too close. His voice, lower than before, would murmur questions like, "How's your day been, Mom?" Or, "Are you feeling okay?" But there was something in the way he asked, like he was testing the waters, seeing how far he could go without crossing a line. I tried to keep things normal, to act as though everything was just as it had been before. Alexei was no help. He was as distant as ever, immersed in his own world. He worked long hours, coming home late, and when he was home, his mind was usually on the news or whatever project was taking up his time. We'd talk in passing, sharing the brief pleasantries that made up the fabric of our marriage. Our connection had dulled over the years, and while I loved him, I couldn't help but notice the emptiness between us. Still, I had no idea how much of that emptiness had shifted into something else, something darker. One afternoon, I sat in the living room, flipping through a magazine, trying to lose myself in the pages. It was one of those quiet, lazy afternoons that should have been comforting. But again there was Daniel. He had come in from the garden, his face flushed from the sun, his shirt sticking to his chest. It wasn't particularly hot, but he looked different. His eyes, wide and dark, seemed to draw me in more than usual. I felt my heartbeat quicken, but I couldn't figure out why. "Mom," he said, breaking the silence. "Can we talk?" I lowered the magazine, trying to hide the unease building inside me. "Of course. What's on your mind?" He sat down beside me on the couch, too close again. His shoulder brushed against mine as he leaned in, and I fought the urge to pull away. There was nothing overt in his actions, nothing that screamed danger, but something about the way he moved, the way he settled so close, felt off. He hesitated. "I don't feel like I can talk to anyone else about this." I waited, unsure of what he was going to say next, my stomach knotting with a mixture of dread and curiosity. "I don't know, Mom," he continued, his voice trembling slightly. "It feels like I'm changing, but I don't know how. It's like no one sees me anymore, like I'm invisible. But I see you. You're different. You've always been there for me. And I want you to know, I don't want things to change between us." I stared at him, the words hanging in the air like a fog I couldn't clear. What did he mean by that? Was he talking about the usual teen angst, the confusion of growing up? Or was there something else? The intensity in his eyes made my breath catch in my throat. "I don't know what you mean," I said, my voice sounding weak even to my own ears. "Things are fine. You're just growing up, Daniel. It's normal to feel like this sometimes. But we're still the same family, okay?" He nodded, but there was something in his face, something that made my pulse race. His expression softened, almost like he was relieved, but that only confused me further. Why would he be relieved? He didn't say anything more, just got up and walked out of the room, leaving me sitting there, shaken. His words kept echoing in my mind, each one heavy with meaning I couldn't quite grasp. "I don't want things to change between us." The way he said it made my skin prickle, as though I was standing on the edge of something dangerous, something that could pull me under if I wasn't careful. The rest of the day passed uneventfully, but my thoughts never left that conversation. When I went to bed that night, I lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling, my mind spinning. Was I imagining all of this? Was it just my overactive mind creating something out of nothing? Or had I really begun to see the subtle, creeping shift in our relationship? The next day, I woke up early to make breakfast. Alexei was already gone. He left before the sun rose these days. Daniel stumbled into the kitchen a little later. His hair tousled from sleep. His usual tired expression softened by something I couldn't quite name. I noticed again how closely he stood to me as I scrambled eggs, how his fingers brushed mine as he reached for the salt. It was a fleeting moment, but it sent a jolt through me. "Morning, Mom," he said quietly, his voice carrying that same strange weight to it. "Morning, sweetheart," I replied, trying to sound normal, trying to ignore the tightness in my chest. For a split second, I caught him looking at me, not in the way a son looks at his mother, but as if he were looking at something else, something deeper. It unsettled me more than I cared to admit. And yet I said nothing. Couldn't. As the days passed, I began to notice more subtle shifts, like a wave quietly eroding the shore. His gaze would linger a moment too long whenever I passed by. His questions about my day would always be personal, probing. Even the way he'd sit near me, closer than before, made my heart race, and I felt myself growing more distant, more afraid of what might come next. I didn't know what to make of any of it. Was he just a teenager going through a phase, or was something deeper happening? I couldn't escape the feeling that the lines between us were starting to blur in a way that was neither natural nor healthy. I wasn't sure where this path was leading, but it felt like I was standing on the edge of something I wasn't ready to confront. Days bled into weeks, and still nothing felt right. I had been trying to convince myself that I was overthinking things, that I was just a mother seeing change in her child and struggling to accept it. But the more I tried to bury my unease, the harder it became to ignore. Daniel's behavior hadn't stopped. If anything, it had grown more pronounced. He would often find excuses to be near me, lingering in the kitchen when I was cooking, sitting next to me on the couch when I was reading, finding ways to interrupt my solitary moments, always placing himself in my space. The odd part wasn't just the proximity, though. It was how he seemed to study me, as if waiting for something. His gaze would hold just a little too long, and I could feel his eyes tracing the lines of my face, my hands, my every movement. It was subtle, but it was enough to send waves of discomfort through me. One evening, Alexei wasn't home for dinner again. I had gotten used to his late hours, though it still left a dull ache in my chest. It was just Daniel and me, something that used to be so simple, something that felt natural. But that evening it felt foreign. We ate in near silence, the only sounds coming from the soft clinking of utensils against plates. I could feel Daniel's presence beside me, too close. His knee brushed against mine under the table, and I froze. The simple gesture, so innocent, shouldn't have felt like a shock to my system. Yet it did. I tried to dismiss it as nothing, as a fleeting accident. But it wasn't the first time. I glanced at him briefly, and his eyes met mine. The look in them was different. There was an intensity there, something heavy that seemed to hold me captive for a moment. It was the same look I had seen before, only more pronounced now. His mouth twitched like he was about to say something, but then he simply turned his gaze back to his plate, pushing his food around with his fork. I couldn't focus on my meal. My thoughts were all tangled up, and my stomach churned uneasily. I found myself wondering how long I could keep pretending that nothing was wrong. After dinner, Daniel and I sat in the living room. He flipped through channels on the TV, not really watching anything but still staying close. I could feel his gaze occasionally darting toward me, his eyes catching mine when I thought I was safe, lost in my own thoughts. "Mom," he said softly after a long stretch of silence. "Can we talk?" I was startled by the request. He hadn't asked to talk to me like this in days. Usually, our conversations were about his homework, or the mundane details of his day. But this was different. I set down the book I had been holding, my hands shaking slightly as I placed it on the coffee table. "Sure, Daniel. What's on your mind?" He shifted closer, his knee touching mine again. I barely resisted the instinct to move away, to create some space between us. But I stayed still. His eyes bore into mine, dark and intense. There was something raw about the way he was looking at me, something that made me feel exposed, like he could see straight through me. "I don't think you understand," he began, his voice low. I sat there, frozen, my breath catching in my throat as Daniel's words hung in the air, heavy and thick, like a storm that had been brewing for far too long. The world around me seemed to narrow, the ticking of the clock on the wall suddenly deafening, and my mind struggled to process what was happening. "There's this gap between us," Daniel continued. His voice still soft, but the weight of it felt like an anchor pulling me down. "I don't want it to be there anymore, Mom. I want us to be closer. I want you to understand me like you always did. I want us to not be strangers." His words were a knife, slowly slicing through the calm I had so carefully built around myself. My heart was pounding now, the blood rushing in my ears, drowning out the rational thoughts that tried to take over. How was I supposed to respond to this? What could I say? Everything about this conversation felt wrong, and yet I couldn't escape it. I felt his presence next to me, pressing in like an invisible weight, and I tried to pull myself together. But the more I tried to distance myself from him, the more his words seemed to echo in my chest. "I want to be closer." I forced a smile, though it felt thin and fragile. "Daniel," I said, trying to sound calm, trying to soothe the swirling chaos in my head. "You're growing up. You're becoming an adult, and that means things change. We both have to adjust, okay? There's nothing wrong with change." He didn't respond immediately. Instead, he shifted again, so his leg brushed against mine more firmly this time. The warmth of his skin against mine made my heart lurch painfully, and I could feel the blood drain from my face. I forced myself to breathe, to steady my hand as I tried to act like everything was fine. But I could feel it. The boundary between mother and son was blurring in ways that felt utterly unnatural. "I don't think you understand," he repeated, his voice softer now, almost pleading. "I don't just want things to change. I want us to be more. To be together. Like we used to be, but more. In a different way." I blinked, the words washing over me like cold water. I wanted to scream, to run away, to do anything to escape the feeling rising inside me. But I couldn't. His eyes, those dark, searching eyes, held me in place, locking me in an unspoken promise that I didn't understand and yet couldn't ignore. "Daniel, stop." The words came out before I could stop them. The force of them startled me, but it felt like the only thing I could do to break the suffocating silence. I pulled back, shifting in my seat, trying to put some distance between us. "This isn't right. This isn't how it's supposed to be." He blinked, a flicker of confusion crossing his face. "What do you mean, Mom? You don't want things to be different?" I recoiled inside, the knot in my stomach tightening. How could I explain this? How could I put words to this feeling of something being terribly wrong when I wasn't sure myself what was happening? I started, but my voice failed me. I swallowed hard, trying to steady myself, to regain control of the conversation. "I want things to be normal, Daniel. I want you to feel supported. I want you to feel like I'm here for you. But there are lines we can't cross, and this isn't normal." He looked at me then, a mixture of hurt and something darker in his gaze. "I'm not a child anymore, Mom. I don't need you to treat me like one." His words were quiet, but they landed like a slap. I recoiled again, my mind racing. This wasn't just about a son seeking comfort or a mother giving advice. There was something deeper, something that I couldn't articulate, that felt wrong. The silence that followed was unbearable. I could feel the weight of his gaze still lingering on me, and I wanted nothing more than to escape it. But I couldn't move, couldn't break the spell that seemed to have woven itself around us. My chest felt tight, my heart hammering in my throat. And then, before I could say another word, he stood up. His movements were slow, deliberate, like he was measuring his every step, every word. "I just thought you would understand," he said softly, a note of sadness in his voice. He left the room, the door clicking shut behind him, and I was left alone, my body frozen, my mind reeling. What had just happened? What had he meant by that? I just thought you would understand. I sat there in the silence, the weight of the room pressing down on me. My hands trembled in my lap as I fought to make sense of everything. Had I been wrong all along? Had I ignored the signs, thinking this was just another phase in his adolescence? But what if it wasn't? What if this was something more? What if I had crossed some line without realizing it, without even knowing where it was? I couldn't answer that question. I didn't know how to. All I knew was that things were changing between us in ways I wasn't prepared for, and I was losing control. Later that night, when I crawled into bed beside Alexei, I couldn't sleep. I stared into the darkness, the quiet of the house pressing in on me. I was torn between the two worlds, the life I had known and the one that was unfolding before me, too slowly and too painfully to ignore. I didn't know who I was anymore, or what was happening to my family. And most painfully, I didn't know how to fix it. I didn't know how to turn back the clock to the days when things felt simple and right. I didn't know if I even wanted to anymore. The weight of the silence, of my own uncertainty, felt suffocating.